welcome back to Coding with Caleb. Today I'm going to be talking about numbers and variables and how to use them in math. By the end of this video, you're going to know how to properly assign numbers to variables and then perform different math equations with them. Let's jump right into it. So the first thing you need to know how to do is assign a number to a variable. And numbers are different than strings, so both of these are actually incorrect right here. You're not going to type out the name of the number, and you're not going to assign the number. You're not going to surround the number with strings. What you're going to do instead is just type the number. This is the data type integer, which I did touch on in my first video in this series. If you want to learn a little bit about that in that video, you can go watch it. But we're really going to review everything about it in this one, so you don't have to. So knowing how to use numbers in Python is very useful, as you can write complex programs as your knowledge grows later on that could literally do your homework for you. So if we have num1 and num2, then we could add them together like this. Num3 equals num1 plus num2. And then if we print that like so, just num3 since it's a variable all by itself. And if you want to learn all the different ways to format printing and strings, you can go check that out in another video. But if you're just printing a variable, you can just put the variable in by itself. So let's run that. And the answer is 5, because we all know 2 plus 3 is 5. And if you don't, you should probably go back to kindergarten. Now obviously this isn't that useful because we have to go in and change the numbers ourselves. So why don't you pause the video real quick, and I challenge you to try to make it so it adds together whatever numbers you input. So if your program looked a little bit like this, then you probably got some errors. And to show that, let me run it real quick. And if I enter 2 and 3, then we get 32. Like, that's not what we entered. Or if you had num1 right here and num2 right here, you probably got 23 if you enter 2 and 3. And the reason is because when it asks you for an input, it's taking in strings. So if you watched our last video on strings, you'll know when you add 2 strings together, you're just putting them side by side. So rather than adding numbers together like 2 and 3 to make 5, you're adding 2 and 3 to make 23. And we don't want that though, because that's not how math works. So what you can do is we're going to use a function called int, which makes anything into an integer. So you can either put it here surrounding the input, so whatever you input is going to be turned into an integer, or you can do it in the equation and surround that with the integer, and surround the variable with the integer. And if we run that, then I'm gonna enter 2, 3, but I get 5. But there is something to be warned though. If you don't enter, oh my gosh, my keyboard. If you don't enter a number, then you will get an error, because 1 cannot be turned into an integer. So you just got to be careful with that, and you're going to want to add some error handling and more complex programs to stop any errors because they always stop your program, and I'll teach you how to error handle probably in a later video. So integers are whole numbers like 1, 2, 3, 23, so on. Although an integer is not 1.1 or 1 point anything, not even 1.0. That's what's called a float. It's very different. And because they are different, this would actually affect this program right here. If we run it and we try to enter 5.5 plus 4, we will get an error, because if we try to turn 5.5 into the string 5.5 into an integer, it only takes base 10, so whole numbers. So that's a little problem, because we can't use any decimals. Like, that's kind of dumb. So what we gotta do first is actually turn it into a float, because once it's a float, then we can turn it into an integer. And it's kind of weird. I don't get why Python doesn't just let you turn strings that are floats into integers. It will just chop off the decimals. So let me show you. If we run it and we do 5.5 and 4, so before I hit enter, typically when you round, this will become 6. So you'd think your answer would be 10, but it's actually 9, because when it turns this from a float to an integer, it simply just like deletes that. It gets rid of it. So we end up with 5 and 4. And if you don't want to do that, you could simply add, if you wanted to, and it gets kind of complex, but you could add round in right there and make sure you have the right amount of parentheses on this side. And as you can see, it's kind of gets a little hectic right here, because you got input, float, round, integer. And you could break it up. For example, if you wanted to do this, then you could just have num2 equals float num2, and you could do this for every single one, like on down a list, just then round it, then make it an integer, and that makes your code neater and easier to follow if you do want to do this. And I do suggest doing this. It's just I'm doing this so it's easier to see. But if you want more accurate, you're gonna want to round instead of just doing the conversion from float to int and just chopping off that decimal point. So now that we got, addition, how do you do other operations in math? So obviously the next one would be subtraction, which is the minus sign. And if we run that, we can enter 2 minus 3. And of course I have num2 here and num1 there, so it's going to think 2 minus 3. So actually that's kind of a problem now, so we're just going to get rid of that, copy that, paste that, and replace that with num2. And if we rerun that, then instead, the cool thing about Python is it actually does do negative numbers, so you don't have to worry about like converting it to some new or something. That would be terrible. But so that's minus. Then there's multiplication, which is an asterisk. And then if we just run that, we all know that 2 times 2 is 4. It should be fish, but Python thinks it's 4, so. The finally division is just a slash. And if we run it, we all know 2, not W, 3 divided by 3 is 1. And it will return it as a float, just because it's division. If you want to change it back to an integer, then you could add int or round right there. whatever you want. And then there's some other fancy ones. For example, there's if you do the percentage symbol, this is called a modulus. I might have said that wrong, modulus. I'll just put it up on the screen during editing how you spell it. But when you do division, for example, 25 divided by 4, it's actually going to give you the remainder. So you'd think, like, 6. The answer would be 6 remainder 1, but it's only going to give you the remainder. So if you want to find out, just if there's a remainder, I do use this sometimes in programs to find out if something is divisible by something else. So, going to be useful later on. Then if you want to have exponents, like we want num2, but to the power of 3, I want to change this to addition. Then if we run that, and we enter 2 and 3, and 3 will be to the power of 3. So 3 to the power of 3 is 27, so 27 plus 2 is 29, so that math checks out. And then finally, there's the opposite of modulus. It's floor division, which ignores remainder, because regular division will print the remainder as a decimal. So floor division simply ignores the remainder. For example, the one I used earlier, 25 divided by 4 is 6, without the remainder 1 anywhere to be seen. And if you have longer programs, then they follow the standard order of operations. If you don't know what that is, I'll just kind of show it to you real quick. It's brackets and parentheses. So if you got these or these, they come first. Then it's exponents, absolute value, or square roots, any of that special math. Then it's multiplication and division from left to right. Then addition and subtraction from left to right. So I think you learned that in the 3rd or 4th grade. So unless you're younger than that, you should already know this. But if you don't, you might want to look that up. As again, sometimes be tricky to remember. And there's some sort of acronym for remembering it. I don't know it. I just remember. But it's very useful to know that when you're doing really long equations. That way, everything actually does the math the way it's supposed to. Well, that's numbers and variables. I hope you learned something from the video. Please like and subscribe. It helps out a lot, and thank you for watching.